Well, simply put, there seem to be some inconsistencies with the current explanation of our heliocentric worldview. Heliocentric meaning like balloon-centered?
Heliocentric.
Nah, but for real, Helios was the Greek sun god. Heliocentric means sun-centered. Gotcha, cool. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess that you don't think we landed on the moon either. Basically, that whole conspiracy in a sentence is that Stanley Kubrick filmed a fake moon landing so the Americans could beat the Russians in the space race. Ta-da! America wins. America wins! I take it Kubrick didn't get an Oscar nomination for that one. There's actually a trippy documentary about how Kubrick deals with his frustration over not being able to disclose his work on the moon landing by coding unmistakable inferences to his work into The Shining. He made a lot of changes to the adapted novel by Stephen King, who actually didn't like them. In this documentary, Room 237, they say it was because of this ulterior narrative. Interestingly, Stephen King recently disclosed in an interview that he felt that in his novel the character progressed from normal to crazy, whereas upon first sighting of Jack, Stephen already felt he looked crazy. King saw this movie at a screening that Nicholson was also present at, and as such, didn't want to say as much. But Kubrick wasn't one to miscalculate. The real reason he made the movie was to disclose how he wagged the dog on the lunar mission, and he was pissed. So possibly, the immediate psychosis of Jack, perceived by Stephen King, a similarly calibered adept of human emotion, no doubt, was really the intentional casting of Kubrick's displeasure toward the subject matter of disclosure, animated through the lunacy of Jack, a cathartic transmutation of the artist's personal grievance, with both hiding his work, as he was a known narcissist, and deceiving the public, which is why he made Eyes Wide Shut. Anyway, that's just a theory. Though, the documentary uses geometry. I heard like some guy came out and said he was Stanley Kubrick and that he shot the moon landing, and then later everyone found out he was a hoaxer. But the irony was the video he made was like shot really poorly, which of course Kubrick hasn't produced a single sloppy frame in his entire oeuvre, not to mention he's also dead. Yeah, that was an intentional failure. It was shot very poorly and trying to fail. It's a cover all your tracks except the first one maneuver. If truth has gained enough attention as to be considered a threat, at that point from an adversarial perspective, it is sometimes more effective to speak about that truth as well, but subtly alter it, presenting implausible conclusions or just generally dragging the matter along at a slow crawl. Joining the narrative to instill an intentionally partially right component can dissuade new viewers by making something that is true seem like it is in muddy waters, and thus help stymie growing interest. It's a dark arts jujitsu, the counter narrative, I guess. I call it the why sweep the floor, let's use a rug technique. The rug, a planted portrayal of an event or portrayer of a narrative, provides a way to wipe your feet without covering your tracks, all in an attempt to strengthen this counter narrative. So you're saying the moon is made of Swiss cheese? A Trip to the Moon! The first movie ever made. Look, all I'm saying is that we don't know what it's made of. Francis Bacon in his book Novum Organum recommended further inquiry into, and I quote, whether it be rare, fiery, and aerial, as most of the ancient philosophers have thought, or solid and dense, as Gilbert and many of the moderns, with some of the ancients, hold. And Bacon had previously stated that Gilbert's points, though well observed, do not completely prove his assertion. He also said that the rays of the moon, stars, and comets are not found to be warm to the touch. Nay, the severest cold has been observed to take place at the full of the moon. If, as Bacon attests, it is coldest on full moons, then either the moon is giving off its own light, which is a cool self-luminescence, or the moon cools sunlight in its process of reflection. Another thing Bacon said he knew was that, quote, light is always either received and transmitted or reflected by an even surface, end quote. This last point may give some inroads into the terrain of the lunar surface and possibly the characteristics of its surface area, such as those parts that appear with far less luminosity. If it is giving off cool air of its own nature, then it need not necessarily be solid. And we're back at an impasse. So nowadays, regular people are becoming selenographers and testing if the moon does give off cool light and questioning if it may be self-luminescent. Francis Bacon would be proud. Selenographers? Selenography is the science of measuring the surface and deducing the characteristics of the moon. Selene is the Greek moon goddess and the sister of Helios. Selene means, I write. All right, I'll humor you, Bill. So what then does NASA have to do with an allegedly flat Earth? NASSholes, I call them. I love NASA. I follow Scott Kelly on Instagram. Amazing photos. So did I, but when you start to look into it, you'll find that all photos of Earth from space are just fake CGI images. All right, Bill, let's suppose your crazy Kubrick moon landing theory is correct. Stay on point here. How does NASA even connect to a purportedly flat Earth? Well, what it boils down to is that basically the only going proof we have that we're actually on a ball is a picture of it. So the only game in town that is taking those photographs are space programs from around the world. And many of these are admittedly composite CGI. People throw these allegedly moon-based photos of the Earth into Photoshop, crank up the composition, and they're all stitch work, man. It's a quilt work of deception. But let's assume that's bullshit. That I'm full of shit and stick with what we can prove. That sounds good. Like, for example, NASA did release an image of the Earth from space in 1972. It's pretty famous. You can look it up. Yes. And that 1972 photo that you're talking about shows a perfectly spherical Earth. But we're told in 2016 by Neil deGrasse Tyson and other scientists that the Earth is an oblate spheroid, and even a little pear-shaped below the equator, that is, a little fatter in the southern hemisphere. I saw that. I follow Neil Tyson on Twitter. So my question is, how can it be an oblate pear-shaped spheroid if the only NASA-claimed non-composite photograph of Earth from space ever taken, which was back in 1972, reveals a perfectly spherical ball Earth? Which is it? Ball-shaped or pear-shaped oblate spheroid? You can't have it both ways. And if it's the latter, like they say today, then what are we looking at in that 1972 photograph? And why? Because we never went to space? Because the Earth isn't a ball? All right, Bill. A lot of people won't put as much stock into this as you have, but I'm your friend. I trust you. So let's assume your crazy imaginarium of Bill Parnassus is real. Take the ISS. The International Space Station has a 24-hour cam view of the Earth, yes? True, but it looks like a CGI Earth on a green screen behind a real satellite hanging from a fixed rafter. They're telling us this thing is in low orbit, moving over 17,000 miles per hour. What would you need to believe that wasn't a doctored video? If by chance the ISS happens to be over a part of the Earth during a real severe storm, the weather patterns as viewed on the stream could be cross-checked by Earth-based analysis, such as basic rain gauges, wind vanes, and anemometers. Anemometers are used to calculate wind speed. If the ISS happens to be over a part of the Earth when, say, a Hurricane Sandy type event is occurring, then we can analyze the behavior of the atmosphere on the video feed and attempt to corroborate it with our measurements of the event on Earth. If they seem to correlate with the local instruments, we'd be all good. That'd do it for me. Oh, is that all? But if the stream is fake, then they could fake the storm conditions. If someone's out to deceive you, it's pretty hard to stop them, especially if you don't expect it. I guess that's true. But at the very least, it would require an upgrade of altered conditions to reveal the storm activity, and we could analyze and then vet or debunk that data. Basically, it's just like forcing the line. The idea being, the more difficult we make it to fake, the more likely we are to uncover falsifications. It's one of the ways to approach this conspiracy. Continue to force attempts at proof. Look, I'm not saying this is an easy thing to process, and it may not even be true, but if you had been lied to as a child to believe your surroundings were such and such, when in reality they were supremely different, wouldn't you want to know? Yeah, but I follow NASA. I'm a fan of their work. What about the Galileo mission back in the 90s? They took 25-hour time-lapse photography of the Earth and strung it together, revealing an image of Earth from space. The event happened. People definitely worked their asses off. Carl Sagan being one among others. So what do you know? On December 8, 1990 at 3 p.m. PST, Carl Sagan and fellow astronaut Andy Ingersoll did an interview on JPL-TV with planetary astronomer Richard J. Terrile. During the interview, Sagan mentions the ability to have obtained a close-up in this recent Galileo sequence and describes how the footage will zoom in on what he said would be somewhere over the middle of Australia. There's a few uploads of it on YouTube. The one I found that was most complete was a nearly 2.5-minute video uploaded by a user named FilmFur.die For the first 90 or so seconds, the Earth spins beautifully, though none of the clouds move. Now, some clouds not moving would make sense, but if you think about the general behavior of clouds, the idea that none of them would move over what was just over 60% of the time-lapse sequence is highly unlikely. Then the video camera zooms in on a section of the globe purportedly near Australia, just like Sagan said it would, and at approximately 1:47, the frame crossfades and lo, all of a sudden a great close-up. The clouds are moving beautifully, and quite quickly I might add. So you think, oh, it must have been a scale issue, right? They zoomed in, now we can see the clouds. That's what I thought. And that would be true, but there was another mistake. If you look at the edge of the Earth in the frame, which up until the crossfade was rotating at a noticeably steady speed, you can plainly observe that it has stopped rotating. The allegedly spinning ball Earth in that frame is literally not moving. If Galileo was documenting our home, a globe that continually spins, as NASA claims, then how could a satellite revealing video of the Earth show about 90 seconds of no cloud movement and perfect spin, then zoom in and cut to perfect cloud movement and zero spin? The answer is that this was computer graphical work done in the 1990s, and they certainly didn't anticipate there would be an internet, and on that internet, droves of flat earthers scouring every inch of NASA evidence frame by frame, looking for inconsistencies. It was simply amateur computer graphical work. Well, it's interesting. Neil Armstrong notoriously never gave interviews about the moon landing. It was almost as if he was avoiding it. And Buzz Aldrin punched out some guy that kept asking him to swear on the Bible that he landed on the moon. What would you swear on a Bible? That I want to learn the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Good one.